It's been a long, hot summer. We're not just talking about the physical temperature, we're talking about the political temperature as well. And this is the subject that's been on the burning fingertips of every keyboard warrior and on the wagging tongues of every morning coffee shop tertulia. We are, of course, talking about the tensions, the cross-border tensions between Gibraltar and Spain, the diplomatic reprisals, the border queues, the controversial creation of Gibraltar's artificial reef, and the threats by the central Spanish government to Gibraltar, to Gibraltar's finance centre, to Gibraltar's bunkering, to individuals as well, and of course all the cross-border tensions that come with it. Now, because this is the first viewpoint of the season and it's such an important issue, we have a bumper viewpoint for you. We've got 90 minutes. Now, don't get used to this. It's a one-off. And you can join in the debate by emailing viewpoint@gbc.gi. That's viewpoint@gbc.gi. And you can also join in the conversation online by going onto Twitter and using the hashtag GBC Viewpoint. It's pretty simple, one word, hashtag GBC Viewpoint. I'll be introducing my guests in just a minute. It's a big panel, the cast of Ben-Hur, and just before we do so, we're going to go to an interview that we recorded earlier on today with the Chief Minister, Fabian Picardo. We asked him whether he felt the diplomatic language had changed over the last few weeks. Here's what he had to say.
I think we have. If you look at the article or interview published by ABC on the 4th of August with Mr. Margallo, that was extremely belligerent, talking about a toll being imposed almost immediately. We were looking at all the other potential threats against Gibraltar being things that were being considered to be imposed almost immediately. You've seen throughout the summer that we've heard a lot of rhetoric. The level of the rhetoric is now coming down. Even the level of the queues at the frontier is now coming down. So I'd like to think that we have now moved on to a different stage of this particular onslaught.
Do you feel that you've changed your diplomatic stance?
I don't think we have at all. If you look at what we have been saying since March of last year about how we would deal with the issues affecting the fishermen, for example, our position has been completely consistent since then. We said then that we would have a report, and if there were recommendations in the report that enabled us to change the fishing legislation, we would. And that's why, despite suggestions to the contrary by some of our political opponents, we are able to demonstrate just how consistent we have been in the approach that we have taken. And I also think that's why the United Kingdom has been so supportive of the government of Gibraltar, because we have consistently been reasonable in the way that we have dealt with all of the issues that have arisen.
So if you could go back to the beginning of the summer, knowing what you know now about everything that's happened, the border queues, the reprisals from the Spanish government, you would do everything exactly the same as you've done it?
Of course I would, because what we did was well thought out and it was carefully calibrated. And if we hadn't seen this reaction from Spain in relation to the creation of the artificial reef, for example, which I think is what you're getting at, we would have seen it on something else. This has been a clearly set out strategy of the Partido Popular to try and go back to the Brussels process. It's a strategy that has failed. It's attempted to put pressure on the United Kingdom to sit round the table with Spain in the bilateral process that matters, namely the Brussels process, where the issue of sovereignty is to be discussed between them pursuant to the UN resolutions. That has been the transparent strategy, and it has not worked.
The name of the game now is ad hoc talks. Can you explain to us what these talks mean?
I think I've said a lot about what it means to the government of Gibraltar in my ministerial statement. We're talking about talks which will not be about the future of Gibraltar. They will not be about the sovereignty of Gibraltar. They will not be lateral in any sense, that there will not be bilateral, trilateral, or quadrilateral encounters. There will be encounters that bring together the parties that may be relevant to the issues that we are discussing. Of course, the government of Gibraltar and the government of the United Kingdom have repeatedly said that we are still strongly committed to the trilateral process. We are prepared to deal with anything that arises, whether it's problematic or whether it is an opportunity, under the umbrella of these ad hoc talks.
And you're not concerned at all that the formula of ad hoc talks could be used by Britain and Spain to discuss Gibraltar bilaterally?
I have absolutely no concern whatsoever that the United Kingdom would want to discuss Gibraltar bilaterally. I think the words of the Prime Minister on National Day are clearer than we have heard from any British Prime Minister or any British politician before. So there's no question of the Gibraltar government allowing the United Kingdom to enter into Brussels talks. Now, because this has become such a central issue for Spanish diplomacy, the idea of bilateral talks, the Spanish now appear to want to say that whenever a British official meets a Spanish official, when they're dealing with a European issue, and Gibraltar issues in Europe have traditionally been dealt with by British officials since we joined the Union, they suddenly say, there's a bilateral between the UK and Spain. Well, look, it may be bilateral in the sense that there are two people, but all matters relating to the EU, which the United Kingdom deals with under our constitution, are ad referenda to the government of Gibraltar. There's no question of Spain ever achieving, and I'm using my words very carefully, ever achieving a return to the bilateral process at Brussels, or any bilateral process, again, I'm choosing my words very carefully, any bilateral process that would involve discussion of the sovereignty of Gibraltar without the people of Gibraltar. Why? Because the United Kingdom has made very clear that it will not allow that unless the people of Gibraltar wish it. And the people of Gibraltar will never wish it.
When this new fishing legislation comes into play in Parliament, do you expect all the Spanish government hostilities to fizzle out?
Well, look, we are doing what we think is right in Parliament. We are going to bring legislation to look at a particular section of the Nature Protection Act and deal with some aspects of it in a less totally prohibitive way than we have until now, because we have the advice to allow us to do this in a way that continues to be sustainable, that continues to replenish stocks. Now, that doesn't mean a blanket permission to fish. We're not going to go back to that. There are going to be regulations which will also ensure that fishing is done in a proper way, but that there can be fishing. Sports fishing, as well as some element of strictly controlled commercial fishing, with some methods that may not have been allowed until now. Spain knows that they have simply filed an SAC which overlaps with the real British SAC in these waters, and they're just trying it on to see whether this in some way advances their claim to our waters. There's nothing else there. And the fishermen are unfortunately the pawns that the Spanish government has used in this game.
That's Fabian Picardo there talking about the summer of discontent, the subject of our first viewpoint of the season. Let me introduce our cast. From right to left, first of all, Charles Gomez, a local barrister who earlier this summer penned an article for the Gibraltar Chronicle on the media repercussions and everything that happened on the Spanish newspapers over the last few weeks. Next to him is Susi Barranco, the Deputy Mayor of La Linea. Then we have Christian Hernandez, the President of the Chamber of Commerce. To my left, we have Marilu Guerrero, former President of the World Association of Small Businesses and founder member of the SDGG. We have Nick Cruz, the former leader of the PDP. And Nuria Gomez, no relation to Charles, who is a cross-frontier worker, works in Gibraltar, lives in La Linea, and is a member of the Cross-Border Workers Association, Aztec. Welcome to you all. Thank you very much for joining us on Viewpoint. My first question will be addressed to Nick Cruz. Nick, you stood for election a number of times, so you've got quite a bit of experience on the Gibraltar political scene. Can you tell me that if you were an elected representative of the people, would you have created that artificial reef if that reef had been recommended to you by these experts that have been commissioned by the government?
No, I wouldn't. I'll be honest with you. I think that you cannot make decisions based on purely on expert advice. If you're in a position of responsibility, you have to think of the wider picture. It's not a question of whether you're entitled to. Of course, the government are entitled to put as many reefs as they like in our waters. We can do that as much and as often as we like. But I think there is a degree of diplomacy that has to be adopted, particularly in the face of the challenges we face. We see it at an international level, whether it's Obama and the way he deals with Syria, whether it's Cameron and the way he deals with issues. Whatever rights you may have, you have to have a level of balance and measure. I wouldn't have done it. Having said that, it's been done, and I certainly wouldn't remove it. And in that sense, I think the government's right not to even contemplate that possibility, because it is our waters and we're entitled to do what we like.
Marilu Guerrero, do you feel that the government poked a bear? in the creation of this reef?
Well, let's be honest, if it hadn't been the reef, it would have been something else. We heard from the moment Mr. Margallo came in that the party was over and that he was going to go all out, and the reef was an excuse, if you like. If we hadn't done the reef at that particular time, something else would have happened, because whenever we have queues, it's historically in summer, it's the height of the tourist season, so that's when they turn the screws on the frontier, usually. So, yes, we gave them an excuse.
It happened last year, didn't it?
Exactly, and there was no reef last year. So I think whether they should have been done at that stage or not is probably a matter of opinion. It's our waters. We don't have to ask permission to do it, and we did get the advice of the expert report. But let's not kid ourselves that all this has been brought about by the laying of the concrete blocks on the reef. It hasn't. If it hadn't been the reef, it would have been something else. I have no doubt whatsoever about that.
Nuria Gomez, you have friends on both sides of the border. You have friends in Gibraltar. You work here. You live in Spain. Can you give us an insight into what ordinary people are saying about the creation of that reef?
You have all divisions, really. I mean, there are some friends of mine that I thought I could have a normal... You know, some friends that I had thought were pretty rational. And then suddenly you bring up the topic and you suddenly get into a discussion that, it's very difficult to say. There's not one particular way of thinking. You do have people that are completely against it. You do have a lot of Spanish people that will admit and that will think that it's a smokescreen. You do have people understanding that the fishermen are trying to earn a living, without really going into detail whether most people know that there are reefs in other places in Spain. So, as soon as you start looking into internet and start looking on different web pages, you can find out a bit more of the truth.
So you've got radicals, and then you've got
everything. You've got everything on both sides. I mean, in the office, you've got people that think one thing or the other, and basically it all comes down to respect and trying not to get too far, too deep into discussion, because then it's when it starts getting dirty.
Like religion, you don't touch.
Yeah, there's certain things that you just can't
do you
talk
find,
about.
as a cross-border worker, that sometimes there's a bit of tension between perhaps you and your friends in La Linea?
Oh, yeah. I mean, like I say, there's one particular friend that I was completely surprised. For me, I thought she was going to be completely agreeing with me. I must say I am quite pro-Gibraltar, so... I know that I have friends that are anti-Gibraltar, so I can't... and I'll have lunch with them, but I won't go into the discussion of I won't say whether they think Gibraltar should be Spanish or not. But this particular friend really, really surprised me, because she was completely irrational. For me, the lies that have been heard everywhere have been amazing. And to think that rational people, intelligent people, will accept those lies and repeat them, it's kind of, you kind of get dumbfounded, and I've been very surprised by many people.
Okay. Susie Barranco, Deputy Mayor of La Linea, can you tell me if you feel that the fishermen that live and work in La Linea, and some of them fish in Gibraltar's waters, whether they feel that the creation of that reef is reasonable?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that I am not here speaking as a representative of the National PSOE party or of the Spanish government. I am talking as an authority of La Linea Council, and I would like to say that maybe we said from the first day in the mayors, and as we said that this is a smoke screen, and I think that people in La Linea thinks that this is very disproportional, the measures that the government has taken, Spanish government has taken about Gibraltar, because we think that when we were suffering, Spanish people were suffering, the most terrible measures from our government, because it were austerity measures. Maybe it was are necessary. I'm not going to discuss that, but I say that it were very, very hard for us. When we were talking, everyone in Spain were talking about Bárcenas and about Urdangarin, about everything. PP party found the concrete blocks. I think they were looking for a problem. They were looking for an excuse
Do you think that smokescreen has been successful?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
You think that people are talking about Gibraltar more than they are talking about Barcenas and the economic crisis that they have in Spain?
Yes, of course, of course. They get where they were looking for. Once I have said that, I would like to say too that we have a problem with our fishermen. I don't want to forget our fishermen because we have a problem with them. But I think there are different things. We have a problem with our fishermen, but we have a smoke screen, and people from La Línea are every time we are the Cinderella again.
La Línea.
Yes,
the
La Línea is the Cinderella.
Okay, so do you feel perhaps hard done by the central government on a repeated basis?
Yes, we have. I think that central government doesn't mind La Línea. It's no. Well, maybe because I have say this in my country. I have been vilified, and I have had threat.
From your
they
own
have
people?
said yes to kill me and everything. But it's because I have said that this is and we have said, the mayors too, that this is a smoke screen, and this is not a real problem. I think we have a problem with the fishermen. I don't want to forget it.
Yes.
But
in balance, perhaps?
Disproportional.
Yes.
These measures and everything. It has been a terrible summer.
Okay.
What happened?
Charles Gomez, would you have created that reef?
Well, I think the sinking of the reefs is possibly the best president that Mariano Rajoy could have expected to receive this summer. It's put out of the news in an incredibly effective way a corruption scandal, the Bárcenas corruption scandal. Even as late as the end of August, even the story of the destruction of evidence in relation to tapes that Mr. Bárcenas had kept and records of monies paid was eclipsed in importance in the Spanish press by the Gibraltar issue. So Mr. Rifi, as some people call it in Gibraltar, for reasons best known to themselves, is actually the best present gift that Mr. Rajoy could have ever expected. It's been an extraordinary coup, a success for him. And this is a matter of concern for the future, because I do not believe, I've heard the Chief Minister talk about no Brussels, no return to Brussels, etc. I think that discussion, that narrative and debate is a debate of another time. Brussels, etc., are completely irrelevant.
Don't you think that with the Pepe government, though, that, as Marilu has said, that the pressure on Gibraltar and the rhetoric on Gibraltar and all the media attention that's been given would have happened anyway?
Of course, and in fact it was happening at the beginning of summer, because you'll remember that in June, when civil guards on a launch shot at a man on a jet ski, the Union of the Civil Guard came out with a statement which was extremely interesting. The números, as they're called, the members, ordinary members of the Civil Guard, were complaining that their officers were egging them on to provoke an incident. So clearly, not just the PP, but the military strata in Spain, the Civil Guard and so on, had been preparing for this for months. This didn't arise suddenly because the reefs came into the water and suddenly the entire intelligence services, propaganda officers of Spain, etc., got into movement. The whole thing was prepared. Now, to go back, this is a very important point if we want to understand where all this started, or what the first manifestation of it was, and this shooting at the guy on the jet ski. The day after the union said that their officers were provoking them, another statement came from the Civil Guard Union saying that this wasn't the case at all, and that it was the Gibraltar authorities who were provoking the Civil Guards. So what we have really, I tend to consider the events of last summer perhaps in the following, I hope it's not offensive to anyone, but in almost cartoon basis, which is, happy little cartoons, Noddy and Big Ears being Gibraltar driving down the road, and suddenly they make the wrong turning and hit Gotham City. Now, what we've hit is actually the most rarefied kind of right-wing extremism that there is in Spain, which is not new. It's something harking back to the 1930s. It exists there. It's dark and dangerous. And whether it was going to be the reefs or something else, it was going to be provoked. Unfortunately, it was the reefs.
Let's talk about some of the actions that Spain has taken. Obviously, the most glaring example that springs to mind is the border queues, 7-hour border queues, historic. Cristina Hernandez, you're the president of the chamber. How do you feel that your members who conduct cross-border businesses have reacted to this?
Well, we have a very wide membership, and members from different sectors have reacted differently. For example, members on the retail sector have experienced a downturn in sales in August, particularly because August is a month where the proportion of sales from tourists tends to be higher. Members from the catering industry have experienced an upturn in sales because people have been staying in Gibraltar and not going over to Spain. So
in some cases, ironically, this has been good for business in some ways.
For some it has. I mean, Gibraltar has experienced queues and different pressure measures at different points for different reasons. Different Spanish governments have decided to impose queues in Gibraltar for different reasons along the years. And unfortunately, our members have had to live with this for many years now.
There are other threats that Spain has put on the table. For example, the cutting off of phone links, the imposition of that frontier toll. Surely this worries members.
I think if you look at some of the early declarations of Señor Margallo, I think everyone now acknowledges that they were set off the cuff and that there is now no intention of proceeding with any of those measures. I mean, I think shortly after Señor Margallo came out with declarations on the frontier toll, the EU said that they would be legal and they couldn't work. So
but then he changed his tack and said, well, what we're not thinking of imposing is a frontier toll. It's a congestion charge, much like the one that they have in London.
But I think we've moved away from that now, fortunately. And if you look at today's interview in the Chronicle, I think the Spanish government is now saying that they want to engage...
Looking towards dialogue.
Towards dialogue. So I think they are moving away from rhetoric, the strong words that we had in late July and in early August. I think we're moving away from that, and I think it's a good thing that we're moving away from that because, obviously, as a Chamber of Commerce, one of the things that interests us is stability, and I think that with dialogue...
Has that been affected, though? Do you feel that the stability of Gibraltar's finance centre, bunkering industry, have they been affected?
I don't think it has been affected. I think we've had, apart from Spain, where certain media outlets have had, for obvious reasons, negative comments on Gibraltar, but I think if you look outside Spain, there have been some very positive media reports in Gibraltar.
Okay. I think the difference this time, to be honest, and I think one result of our coming under the scrutiny and under the hammer, if you like, again, of Spain's wrath, is that it once again creates a siege mentality here. We've survived, we've been through this umpteen times. Gibraltar always pulls together, but this happens. But I think the difference this time, with other times we've gone through this, to my mind, has been the internet. Whereas other times we've known what's happened here, and some newspapers have picked it up. This time, the online newspapers and the social media has spread it throughout. So a lot more information has gone out about what is actually happening here than we've had in other times when we've suffered these sort of things. And I think that's helped.
Does everyone agree that
Because you can say a lot of lies, but before, whereas a newspaper in, for example, Sweden would have said a lie, we wouldn't even have known about it here. Now they're all counteracted.
But I think actually, you know, going back to Charles' point, I think we can't underestimate the nature of this particular campaign, because we all, well, a lot of us, in fact all of us, will remember 10 or 11 years ago when you had a co-sovereignty proposal. The last time the Pepe came in, it was also a typically right-wing approach. but there was less, perhaps, vitriol. There was less personalisation. And I think it was more political. Now, don't get me wrong, I do recall that there was accusations that our pension scheme was a sham, and there were various different things, and it was, in some ways, you know, it was more dangerous because there was a co-sovereignty debate where Britain was engaged in that process. So I think we're not in the same position. And actually, to the extent that I think the Gibraltar government and the Chief Minister have been very good at enhancing some British support, parliamentary support. I mean, the unprecedented words of Mr Cameron, I think they should be congratulated in that front. But the nature of the campaign in Spain has been far more aggressive and personalised, and I think that's the fear. Because whatever happens, and I hope that there is a toning down and we get to a more sensible level, what's happened over the last few months is going to have a legacy. Because, unfortunately, whether there's internet, etc., the point of views that is expressed in Spain continues and actually is quite scary. And it's not being rejected by the majority of the media, it's been enhanced. And when you watch some of the shows and you see some of the people being asked questions, and Noura makes a point about her friends and she's shocked, I think that's massively worrying, because what it creates is this potential, almost personalised sense that the Gibraltarians are to blame for the situation that Spain finds itself in, that the concerns. And I think that's the worst legacy of this particular episode. And I think here I would call upon the Deputy Mayor and Nuria and the other people in Spain, who I think have an obligation and a duty, as Spaniards, supposedly in a democracy, to say, look, you know what, we're not going to put up with this nonsense. We know that it's absolute rubbish. They may or may not agree about the issue of sovereignty of Gibraltar, but this is nonsense. And I would like to see a far stronger campaign in Spain among those who know the truth to rectify the lies and the mischief that the Spanish government are adopting. And it's not because perhaps they're not trying, but we don't really see it in the volume that I'd like to see, particularly when you think of the amount of people that live off Gibraltar's success. And I think that's something that perhaps we need to address as a community, both sides of the border and in other places, because I think that's the worst legacy of this particular episode.
And with regards to Marilu's comment on internet, I think it has the two sides.
Yes.
It has the element of
I was going to
giving
say that
out,
before, but then
giving out good information, but it also has the element of making people angry and people hiding behind.
As Susie was saying earlier on, she's had threats.
Yeah, and you know, you do feel that people heat up in those forums and just say things that wind people up.
It wasn't so much a forum that I was referring to.
It was more internet
as international press.
Yeah.
Because when we've had the siege mentality other times, very few newspapers outside Spain and England have actually, even in UK, very few have actually picked it up.
I think in this case as well, I mean, this is a personal opinion, obviously, it hasn't got anything to do with Aztec. Spain has... It's been in more of a bad situation. It's made a bit of a show of itself with regards to other countries. I don't know. I think
we'll have to retake that point. Believe it or not, we're actually a third of the way through the programme, and emails or tweets are coming, flying in thick and fast. We're going to take a short commercial break. We'll be back in just a few minutes, and we'll be hearing from a politician on the other side of the border. Stay tuned to Viewpoint.